Okay, we are live with this week's installment of Lunch with EFI. Every Wednesday at noon Eastern, we do this. And we're grateful to have Ian Kingsbury today as a friend and colleague, first timer on Lunch with EFI. This will be his
joining us from the back alley in New England.
That's right. I got my shank with me. I got my hoodie. I'm ready to go.
Yeah,
and was eating lunch just a moment ago. So he's got everything.
Truly lunch with EFI.
Yeah. Right. Although Ian was criticizing us for our gluttonous meal of 3 courses, but we live it up here at EFI.
No, and that's the way to be. I'm just, as a personal lifestyle choice, I try to avoid dessert with lunch, but for friends, I'm willing to make an exception.
Good. Well, today we, as is typical for Lunch with EFI, we've got an appetizer to start, and that's me. So LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, gets sued by the 1776 Project. So this isn't uncommon. There's, this culture war has been going on for many, many years now. It feels like we've been engulfed in this. But the lawsuit says that the district has been channeling funding, outreach, and preferential programs to specific racial groups, but specifically excluding white students. And so
this is a civil rights law that they claim. Okay.
They're using civil rights law as the standard here, and the argument against these programs that LAUSD has been.
And who's the interest group following this litigation? 1776 Project?
It's called the 1776 Project Foundation. They were founded some years ago now by a man named Ryan Gerdusky. And I got confused. I actually, when I first read this story, I thought that this was the group that a friend and colleague Wilfred Riley was a part of, and I think Bob Woodson, and some others are part of.
So there's more than one 1776 organization out there?
Yeah, similarly named.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that was my initial thought. Oh, this is that group. This group, what they do, they're actually their main function is as a PAC, and they help to elect more right-leaning school board members to school districts around the country. So
what do we think about these strategies, right? I mean, you've just described two strategies for change. One is, why don't we field candidates for school board elections? That's how we're going to win the culture war. And the other is, we're going to file litigation and use civil rights law or other laws to kind of force cultural change. California and LA in particular are doing this probably because they're broadly popular where they live, right? So how successful do we think either strategy is likely to be in changing practices in LA?
I mean, with litigation, obviously some of it comes down to luck and, what judges ends up in front of.
Yes, sure.
Well, I mean, you're going to have to go through California District Court and Ninth Circuit. I mean, this is, it's a long road till you have a chance of victory.
Right.
And, what do we think about trying to use courts for this kind of policy change?
I don't, I've thought about this because I wonder how effective any of this is, right? And obviously, from one place to the next, the effectiveness of any particular strategy may vary, right? Maybe it's very effective to do something like this in a deep red state, but it's very ineffective to do it in the Ninth Circuit, right? Where
I think you pursue litigation where your electoral prospects are worse, right? Because you're hoping to be rescued by judges in the law, even against majorities in the electorate. So in like the electoral strategy is foreclosed in LA, but the litigation strategy is still open. But there's the question of whether even if you can achieve victory, how enduring and meaningful those victories are likely to be if you can't also back it up with electoral change. So it seems like litigation would be most effective where a current cartel kind of has a lock on practices and you want to break it up, but these practices are actually unpopular. And once you break it, the electoral majority would never kind of reestablish it. It was snuck in there. So I think that's the case with DEI in a lot of red and purple states, is that no one really wanted it. It just kind of happened. People didn't notice. It got entrenched. It got very hard to undo. Litigation could break it up, and no one's going to then run for office on how I want to redo it again, right? So your litigation victory is going to be enduring.
Are we sure that DEI is popular in blue states? I mean, it was.
No, I don't even think it's that popular in blue states. Gender ideology is another good example. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's broadly popular to have boys and girls sports or boys and girls bathrooms. This is not very popular anywhere. But it just kind of snuck up on us and it got entrenched, and litigation helped knock it out. But you also can win electorally with it, or at least you won't be rolled back electorally. But if in a place it's actually really popular to do something, I worry about how successful we are in trying to use non-electoral things that where when the election comes up again, they're going to find another way to sneak it back in.
I actually think this is probably a Supreme Court play, because I don't think that they'll find much success in the local courts. I don't think that they'll find success. I think they're going to have to appeal it. And I think that they probably strategically selected LAUSD because it's huge. It's like it's the second or third largest. It's always in the top 3 largest school districts in the country by student population anyway.
Right, the Supreme Court can only pick so many cases, and they're very selective about what they don't take on every issue.
And that's why I think this is a gamble, but I don't know, because otherwise I don't understand why they think I would have very, very low confidence that the local, state, and even the Ninth Circuit would be favorable in this case. But if knowing I'm not an attorney, and so from my position where I'm looking out from the outside in with very low expertise, so they're all my disclaimers, I still think that the likelihood that this succeeds prior to getting a hearing at the Supreme Court is very low.
So this is very easily framed by the other side as you're trying to prevent the teaching of history.
Yes.
You don't want to teach the history of slavery. You don't want to, right? So it's very easy to portray this in a negative way.
You're admitting your own racism. You're reinforcing everyone's belief, but actual real knowledge that you're a racist by saying that this is anti-white.
Actually, calling people racist wouldn't be popular, but if you say you're censoring history, no one likes censoring, which is why, like the book ban issue, I thought at first that we had a winner. Like there was porn in books in school libraries, and I thought no one likes that. But then the other side framed it as you're a book banner. And once you get tagged as a book banner, and then they somehow throw in Diary of Anne Frank, even though it doesn't get banned, but they somehow they find some place where it was challenged by some idiot, but it's not banned, it's not removed.
Yeah.
You then get tagged with supporting the removal of the Diary of Anne Frank from school libraries, or the removal of some Nobel Prize winning author's book, even if it is kind of age inappropriate. And then it turns into a loser for you. And I think we did not fare particularly well with the book issue. At first, it felt like an issue, but a winning issue. But then, and maybe we made some gains there because we scared school districts a little bit, and so they were a little more cautious about the guidance they gave to their librarians. But frankly, librarians are in charge, and they
Yeah.
acquire whatever books they want, and they can push agendas. And if they have, want to push some sort of racial or sexual agenda, they can do it. And it's very hard for school boards to oversee this.
Not sure if I agree with your assessment of how that ended. I mean, there seems to just be sort of a détente within that conflict right now. And, if the other side saw it as a winning issue, they would keep relitigating it.
Right. But we kind of tamped down on some of the worst abuses, but we didn't really establish kind of the clear principle that school boards ultimately have to make decisions about finite resources like space in libraries, and have to pick which materials are most age and educationally appropriate. And it's not up to the unelected school librarian to decide. This is up ultimately to the elected officials who run the school board, as long as those elected officials are not engaged in illegal actions when they make their preferences so they cannot engage in racial or other impermissible discrimination or sexual discrimination when making these decisions. They also can't engage in viewpoint discrimination. So they have to, school boards do have the authority in principle, but they have to be careful not to violate the law in the exercise of that authority. But what we're left with still is a situation where librarians are in charge.
The inappropriate book issue in school libraries is still, to this day, one of the major drivers for the recruitment of more conservative-leaning school district board members.
Yeah, but it's you get the school board election strategy has been a terrible failure over decades.
So I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that at all. But what I'm saying is the people that jump into these races because they feel called to go and serve, which I fully support. I think that's fantastic. Go and get involved. But still, to this day, one of the major issues is that, well, I got involved because I saw what was going on in the school library. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from candidates themselves, that I jumped into the race because of the inappropriate materials in my kid's school.
It sets a fire, but it doesn't sustain the fire.
Right. It's good for galvanizing, and maybe we still have that as a weapon at our disposal and should be willing to use it. But
yeah,
you're right. It's probably
the
not.
1776 thing is a variant of the book ban thing, which is the question is who determines what the curriculum is in schools?
Well, right. I mean, on this question of sort of framing or how it's received by the public, there's an important question here, which is what actually are the specific accusations? So they're claiming discrimination. What does that look like?
Right.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, they actually aren't talking about books, and they aren't talking about they're talking about funding. That is, so I don't think that they call out Title I in particular. I think that this is separate and apart from federal programs. I think they're talking about state programs that then LAUSD has further restricted down into district programs that favor and benefit children based on their race. So it's not so much. It's about access and funding is really what it's about, and it's being directed by by race.
That sounds like a very tough challenge because progressive funding schemes are a pretty widely established and even respected mechanism. So
you could say it's based on need that's independent of race, and need is a permissible criteria for allocating resources.
Yeah, I think it'd be very hard to prove otherwise. Unless the state agencies were very foolish, and we can find emails saying that this was a workaround and really that it's race based. But otherwise, good luck confirming that these were using racial criteria, not economic criteria.
Well, look, advocacy organizations keep searching for strategies, and they don't like hearing that, well, gee, there might not be any good strategy. Why don't you try a different location or a different issue? They're like, well, you got to do something. And so they gravitate to something, even if it's actually ineffective or a waste of resources relative to other things we could be doing. So
I want to talk more about this another time. We should move on to the main dish, but this is interesting to me, and so we should revisit why or why not, or how and in what ways these groups are or are not effective, because I agree largely that this has been chasing of the tail. So I do want to talk about that more.
Well, okay. See, funders keep getting fooled, so they need to not get fooled again.
Nice transition.
And I'll add it. I can't resist. You know. So
Who?
If you're wondering who might be fooling us, it's this guy. Hans Gruber. No, actually, it's Jonathan Gruber. I think we did briefly discuss this in a past EFI podcast.
We did. Yep.
But Jonathan Gruber is an MIT economist who was kind of made infamous for bragging in a video at a videotaped panel that I suspected he didn't think would be made public about how they made analyses of Obamacare opaque so that they could overcome the stupidity of the American voter. That basically American voters didn't understand what they needed, what was good for them, but smart MIT economists could make opaque analyses to fool them so that they could get what they needed. And it seems like he's up to his old tricks again in a new study that came out in the fall with co-author Michael Frakes from Duke, which claims that as the percentage of Black doctors goes up at military health facilities, that military personnel who are Black experience better health outcomes. Actually, the analysis is they look at base-to-base transfers, so that when Black military personnel and and non-Black military personnel are transferred from one base to another base, they may experience an increase or a decrease in the percentage Black doctors at their medical facility. And they look at what happens as a result of those transfers, or when those transfers occur. And they find that when the percentage of Black doctors is higher, that health outcomes are relatively better for the Black personnel who make the same base-to-base transfers as non-Black personnel who make those transfers. And they say, see, that's why, even though it might seem to be impermissible to discriminate in the hiring of doctors on the basis of race, we might need to disregard that. We might need to overcome that stupidity of the American voter and engage in racial preferences because it saves Black lives.
So is this because of unconscious bias, of course, right?
They don't.
Or is it, you know, last week we talked,
you know, you could tell about a dozen different stories of why the theory of why racial concordance, that is having a doctor who's Black, would be more effective with a Black patient. It usually revolves around some sort of more effective connection or communication, so that they connect with each other, that the patient believes the doctor, listens to the doctor, follows the doctor's advice. And that seems to be the dominant theory in this article.
Which is,
yeah.
Which is, by the way, it's just the other side of implicit bias, right? Because the insinuation there is the non-Black doctors aren't connecting with them, aren't listening to them, aren't taking them seriously. So
it could be on the part of the patient. It could be that the patient has the bias.
I suppose.
So last week we talked a little about, you know, mining interests in Greenland and how they had to consult the indigenous people. They promptly disregarded them. But the reason that they did it was because they have other ways of knowing, indigenous ways of knowing. So here in medicine, we have something similar. It's another way of knowing.
I mean, look, you know, given that a very large chunk of Black doctors are drawn from the Caribbean and Africa, it's a little unclear what is the how skin pigmentation is the cultural connection to native-born American blacks, but I'm not smart enough to understand this like these really smart economists. But there's an opaqueness here, because the weird thing about this study is that while it appears to be a study of racial concordance, the reader would be inclined to think that the mechanism by which the benefit is produced is that when the black patient sees the black doctor, outcomes are better. But they never examine what happens as a result of black patients seeing black doctors. They only look at the percentage of black doctors in the facility, regardless of who the patient sees.
Outcomes.
Okay.
I love it.
However, they must have been pressed by a reviewer to do something on this. And they did produce something which is buried in an appendix in table A20, which is they look at the results for patients who never see a black doctor, which, by the way, is possible because there are relatively few black doctors, on average about 8%. Okay, so most patients are not seeing black doctors. So they restrict the sample only to black and white patients who never see a black doctor, both before they're transferred from one military base and when they're transferred to another military base. They never see a black doctor. This is half the sample, by the way. Never see a black doctor ever in the decade that they're examining them. And the effect they report for them is bigger than the overall effect, which would have to mean that the effect of actually seeing a black doctor is much, much lower, or possibly negative. We don't know. They don't report it. But it would have to be the case, because the overall effect of seeing black or white doctors would have to be the average of seeing the only white and seeing black, right? So we see one side of it, but we could infer what the other might be, maybe, but we don't know for sure.
But it's certainly not greater. We know
certainly
that.
Not greater. It would be right, and given that black doctors are 8%, how much lower the effect would have to be, or in fact negative, in order to bring the average down from the white to the overall. That's why it has to be much lower, or possibly negative.
Yeah,
because there's so few of them, and yet they're moving the whole average down a lot. Okay,
he's not going to do the math for you to tell you that.
Right. Well, in fact, they never do a statistical test of whether the white only analysis is significantly different from the overall one. So they could say, well, I mean, the point estimates are different, but we haven't done a test of whether they're significantly different from each other. But this is just treating the point estimates as if they were true, which we don't know for sure. But it has to be lower.
So
anyway,
this guy here,
he couldn't take over the Nakatomi building. Is that the Nakatomi building?
He failed again.
Failed again. He won't fool us again.
For our many listeners out there who are on the far left, do not try to deceive this man with crappy research. He will. That's right. Appendix A20. He's going to find it.
Yeah,
it's like some people are like finding accounting fraud. They like go through I like looking for, but the weird thing is, Gruber and Fraser, they're smart guys, and they're very successful economists at high status institutions. So it's like watching Penn and Teller do a magic trick. Like, they're really good at it, and it's not easy. Like, I don't know how Penn and Teller pull it off. I know that it's not real, though. I know that's a magic trick. And I think that's how we should approach some of these people, is that sometimes you can't find how they did the trick, but that doesn't mean it's not a trick. Well, and they offer two kind of ridiculous explanations for how it is that the effect is bigger for white doctors. Like, why should they be better at institutions when the black percentage of doctors goes up? Well, they say, well, one possibility is that the black doctors teach their white colleagues how to be better. Now, how it is that the black doctors teach the white doctors to be much better than they are is a mystery. And the other explanation is that the patients gain confidence in their white doctors by seeing black doctors in the hallway. Now, I don't know how long it takes you to walk from the waiting room into the room where you receive your visit with the doctor. But that's like 5-10 seconds. And how many other people are you going to see in the hallway? And how would you know if they're doctors or OTs or PTs or nurses or what they are?
And that's obviously the thing you're paying attention to, is you're going to find out if you have cancer.
And this is how I'm thinking, like, oh, I saw a black person in the hallway, so my white doctor, I'm going to really listen to him now. These are preposterous explanations, and so but these guys are Penn and Teller, so they're pretty good at pulling off this trick. But even if you can't find the table 820, you should be suspicious.
Our friend Matthew Ladner, who's seated next to a colorful group of people waiting for jury duty right now, posted in reply to our live stream here: a fraud who works at a high status institution is still a fraud.
but he has really good vacations in the south of France.
Right.
That's right.
So
they're particularly
so speaking of foreigners.
Speaking of foreigners,
not a very good transition.
Jay's got great. I am leaving that too. I will never try to improve my ability to transition from one segment to the next,
locked down,
because I like Jay's so much.
Yeah.
So it looks like he's got connection issues.
He was detained by ICE.
No, I had a dog growling at the closed door.
Okay. Okay, Ian, you are up.
Is it dessert time?
It is dessert time. We're gonna say schools say ICE out.
So this was work done by our friends at Defending Ed, previously Parents Defending Ed, who put together a database of the districts that have released some sort of guidance telling school personnel not to comply with ICE, essentially not to comply with immigration enforcement. And so there's this long list here of, they say more than 700 school districts. Many are, most obviously in blue states, but some also in red states like Arizona. So it's not surprising to see this issue, this, now major culture war issue, come into our schools. But
when you say they have guidance, do they have guidance saying that you must not cooperate, or that you can only cooperate in limited ways, or what does the guidance mean?
My understanding is it says do not cooperate.
Okay.
I think generally it's something like contact the superintendent, but don't answer any questions, don't open the doors, etc.
What are the legal obligations of public officials, public employees to cooperate in general? Like I'm a little unclear on what that is. Could they adopt a policy saying don't cooperate with the local vice squad if they're trying to bust a drug ring or something?
I don't know what makes them feel they have the authority to issue this sort of guidance, because the obvious answer is that no, they're not allowed to supersede that authority. They don't get special privileges by virtue of working in a school. Laws still apply in schools, as it turns out. So, not only is it dangerous because we're talking about law enforcement, but I worry too about the type of precedent that this is setting. You're basically telling your students, well, if it feels righteous, then don't worry about whether it's legal or not. Better, as AOC would say, better to be morally good, right? So the whole thing is an abomination.
Yeah.
Well, but this gets back to, this is not unique to schools. Also, there are sanctuary cities where the local police department has been instructed not to cooperate with federal officials. And so, we have, it's an interesting quirk of our federal system that that what is the obligation of each level to assist the other level in the enforcement of the other level's laws.
So assist, that's a different framing, right? Are you going to assist them or are you going to impede them?
Well, so I'm sure the guidance cannot be that you lie down in front of their cars. I mean, that can't be the guidance.
It says not to, in some cases it says not to open the doors.
Well, I don't know if open the door, that I don't know. We're not lawyers here, so I don't know.
I guess this is a question for a lawyer, but
Yeah.
I mean, look, there are public buildings. And I understand
Right, but they're local public buildings. They're not federal public buildings.
And that doesn't automatically grant anyone access. But, generally the way it works is by virtue of being in a public building, you can't just eschew.
Well, obviously, if federal officials show up with a warrant, they have to let them in.
Right.
But if they're simply conducting investigations and the school doesn't want to open the door for them, I suspect legally they can. So I suspect that the project here by Defending Ed is not to file litigation to force compliance, but is to try to shame and put electoral pressure on these, because some of them, as you say, are in red states.
Yeah.
Where you could adopt a state law instructing school officials to cooperate.
Yeah, right. That might be right. And by the way, on the note of legality, I had to look this up. I wasn't sure, but apparently there was a Supreme Court case, I think in 1982, which clarified that, there is an obligation for public schools to provide an education to illegal immigrant children. Interesting to see whether perhaps that ends up on the docket of the Supreme Court, if that's something that, the Trump administration or allies might want to challenge.
Right. And while that's true, though, it is not incumbent upon public universities to admit or fund non-illegal immigrants. That's not, so it's misunderstood, but K-12 public schools are obligated to provide services.
Right. And I understand people who have moral concerns around this, but it's not an easy issue. I mean, there's a district near us, an urban district, Lynn, Massachusetts, where several years ago they had this deluge of students come in from Central America, many of whom didn't speak Spanish. They spoke these local languages of indigenous peoples in Central America. And, this is a low performing district that did not have the resources to educate these students. And, basically they were pleading with state officials to intervene and help. There was nothing they could really do for these kids. So, we can't pretend that these students coming in isn't an imposition on the district or depriving other students of resources. It is a real problem.
Well, frankly, it's even, there was a court case years ago that decided actually why you need federal enforcement of immigration laws is because Arizona many years ago made the argument that the failure of the federal government to enforce immigration laws by protecting the border was allowing people to cross and imposing costs on Arizona and localities in Arizona. For precisely this reason, they were obligated to provide services, including schools, that this was a financial burden on Arizona. So Arizona decided that they were going to enforce the border. Arizona was, that they were going to use state and local officials, police, to enforce immigration law. And as I understand it, there was a court decision, can't remember the name of it, that decided that actually, no, these are federal laws. They have to be enforced by the federal government. And therefore, ICE is the only entity that can actually do this, which is why you have ICE operating in Minnesota. It's because technically Minnesota is not allowed to do it. So it's a weird, the left argued previously that they didn't want localities to enforce immigration law. Which is how the feds now got brought in, but now they want the feds out of their state and community.
They don't want any enforcement is the reality. I think that's what they're confessing.
Zero enforcement.
Look, and politically this is a mixed bag, right? I mean, some people are more favorably inclined to immigration, some people less, right? And even in red states, this is a mixed bag.
Well, now what is? I just saw news yesterday or the day before that there were some lawmakers trying to introduce legislation that would ban any immigration enforcement within 500 feet of a polling place or something like that. Did you guys hear this?
Because otherwise, you'll deter the illegal immigrants from voting.
Well, this is why, like, everyone I'm sure who read this headline was just immediately in laughter, right? Like,
so I think the argument would be that even legal immigrants who are entitled to vote might be afraid that they would be wrongly detained or questioned by ICE officials, and that them being afraid of that harassment would deter them from coming out to vote.
It's a very charitable interpretation.
I'm just trying to kind of piece it together.
He's steel manning it. That's fine. Here it is. This right here. Democrats push bill blocking ICE near polling places despite clear constitutional conflict. So this was this morning, I guess, just now.
I mean, I think that the Trump administration, has difficulty with process, and they have difficulty with implementation in ways that are, effective. But Trump has a good knack for picking 80-20 issues. Like, he has a knack for picking things where it's going to be broadly popular for him to take one side of an issue. And the flip side of that is that he has a knack of tricking his opponents into taking the 20. And they hurt themselves when they feel obliged to defend the position that's only supported by 20%.
Right.
And I have to suspect that immigration can be an 80-20 here. That most people really don't like the idea of people entering the country without legal permission. And they would like some sort of orderly process of...
And Nick Shirley's work on the widespread fraud in Minnesota that then spurred more investigations by independent journalists in Washington State and elsewhere.
You could look at Europe, you could look at England and France. You could say, maybe I don't really want that here. That, we have to have some process for bringing in immigrants in an orderly and legal process, and ensuring that we have proper assimilation function and having the rate of immigration at a digestible rate so that our assimilating institutions can properly Americanize.
But the left hates assimilation. That's a dirty word, Jay. You can't.
If assimilation simply means if we believe that even if we believe America is an idea, and it's an adherence to a set of values and political institutions, that you're not born with that. You have to learn those processes and those institutions.
Right.
And so assimilation is just getting people to understand and appreciate those values and institutions. Right?
But Jay, I think Matt's right. I don't believe that's part of our political consensus anymore. I mean, when they talk about indigenous ways of knowing, right? Like, there's a lot of the left that believes that there's nothing actually inherently good about our institutions.
So there's no reason why that our institutions and values should be whatever people happen to decide they are.
Multiculturalism is a greater good and a higher ideal than assimilation. This is why the term melting pot was thrown in the trash bin in schools, public schools, decades ago. We don't use that word. This is not a melting pot. This is what they call now, what do they call it? A salad? Salad is in the word that replaced it. And it's not a mixing and a melding and that should not happen. Not only is that undesirable
to retain, identities and pride in their heritage. But that's not incompatible with accepting, appreciating, and obeying the political institutions and values of this country.
You are reasonable, Jay.
Right.
You are arguing the reasonable position.
But I'm saying this is an 80. This is the 80, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very unpopular to say America's fundamentally bad, and it's really great if we overthrow it by importing people who hate it.
But this is one of the very this is one of the positions of the far left, the current Democrat Party, that is unsavory to the 80%. This is one of those positions that today's rank and file elected Democrat down in Congress will stick to, that is one of the check marks in the negative for even the rank and file Democrat voter. They don't like that about their party.
The danger for the Republicans here, frankly, is that there's a creepy version on the right here, which is that America is a bloodline. It's a people, a Volk, as it were, and that we have to be worried about diluting this bloodline. So these kind of blood and soil creepoids on the right are I think a real danger to the Republican Party too, and so Trump is not there. That's not what he's looking for, the 80-20 here. But there are factions in the Republican Party that want to frame this as a bloodline argument, so that the reason certain people can't be assimilated into being Americans, or would never wish to be assimilated into being Americans, because they're from the wrong bloodlines. And I think that the 80% of Americans reject that too. They recognize that America is a polyglot of people from all over the world who have fully embraced a set of values and institutions that make this such a great place.
That's the reasonable position.
I think it is, and that's a winner. The party that can articulate this is the party that wins.
I think another way of saying this, perhaps, is that America is an idea, but it's not an idea that people inherently or automatically ascribe to. And
it's an unnatural idea.
It's unnatural. So they actually be trained up to it. And not only that, but there are cultures and civilizations that don't seem particularly inclined toward those ideas. And we do have to worry about that.
I entirely agree. So that's why immigration has to be at digestible levels. And the harder it is to assimilate people who come from values that deviate more strongly from those of the American system, the lower the rate of immigration needs to be from those places, because they're going to be harder to assimilate. We need, otherwise our assimilating institutions get overwhelmed and fail.
So we need some formula that we can plug in. People from this country are
yeah, we've had terrible difficulty trying to do that, but maybe just if we can't differentiate too much by country, maybe we just want to keep the overall level low enough so that our institutions can function properly at assimilating them into our political system.
Yeah. No, I think that's the reasonable 80%. It's a winning issue, that the people and the electeds that want that 80% need to disavow the extremes, whether it's
Trump did really well among Hispanic voters, in large part because there are a lot of people in Hispanic communities who actually, they're some of the most bothered by unassimilated immigrants, right? They make trouble in their communities. They compete with them for jobs. They compete with them for housing. So it's actually a winner in communities that face that kind of threat and competition from illegal immigration.
And a lot of these people continue to take pride in their heritage, and they should. And
if I live in the suburbs, far away from that, I'm not as bothered by it, and I might appreciate the cheap labor available for all the things I wish to acquire. So that's how we have a class divide on this issue.
Yeah,
where Trump was making inroads with it among the working class and among minorities.
Yep.
But that won't work if you make this blood and soil.
Right.
If you make it blood and soil, then those creepoids are going to drive away the Hispanic voters who were attracted to the Republican Party.
Yeah,
I agree. We have managed to go 15 minutes over our allotted time.
Well, we just had so much food.
Yeah, if you're having dessert, 30 minutes is not enough.
You should eat slowly anyway, from what I hear. So that's great. We took longer than we needed our allotted time, but I was glad to do it. And thank you, Ian and Jay, for jumping in today. Thanks for everyone.
Having Ian.
Yeah. Happy to come back whenever. It's fun.
Yep. Yeah. It's always a good time. So thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.